So I'm Doug Schmidt. I'm a computer science professor, and I'm also the co-director of the Data Science Institute. And what I wanted to do today was just give you a little perspective on what I call rules for success as a graduate student. The focus here is primarily on PhD graduate students, but you'll also see some recommendations that are helpful if you're just starting out with classes before you do the research. So let me give you a little bit of background. There's a reason for doing this from my experience. I started out life in a very different area. I started out life as a sociology major, and I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in sociology. And then after doing that, I switched over to computer science. Since graduating with my degrees, I've been a professor at a couple different places. I was a professor at Washington University, St. Louis, University of California, Irvine, and I've been here at Vanderbilt in various capacities for the past 17 years. But in addition to all my academic work, I've also done a lot of work in terms of government service. I was a program manager at DARPA. I've been the chief technology officer for a number of companies, as well as the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, and been on all kinds of other advisory boards and corporate boards and so on. And the key point I want to get you to take away from this is that if you do your work right and you prepare your career correctly, you can do a lot of different things with the experience and education that you get. And so it's perfectly okay to start out in one path and then switch over time as new opportunities and new situations arise. Moreover, I think it's very important to realize that getting a PhD doesn't just qualify you to be a professor or a researcher, but it also opens up many other opportunities that otherwise would not be open to you. So I could never have been a program manager at DARPA without the PhD. I wouldn't have been able to be the chief technology officer at the Software Engineering Institute at CMU without a PhD. And so the investment that you're making in your graduate career, especially with a doctorate, will give you opportunities that you can't even necessarily even dream about at this point, but will become available to you because you chose that path. So sometimes people think, oh, if I get a PhD, I'm going to be overqualified or I'll be limited in what I can do. And in my experience, it's quite the opposite. There's all kinds of new opportunities that come along that are only available to you because you've taken the time to get this credential. Well, one important thing to ask yourself is, why are you here? If you want to be successful in almost any endeavor in life, you've really got to figure out what your goals are and why you're motivating yourself to invest all this time and effort to get your degree. Too many people end up in grad school, in my experience, without really knowing why they're here. And of course, that makes it hard when things get tough. You'll have a great time. I promise you, you'll learn many things. You'll have great experiences, but not every day is going to be unicorns and rainbows. There's going to be times when you've got a lot of assignments due, or you're struggling to work on a research problem, and you'll ask yourself, why am I here? So here's some common reasons that people become PhD students. One reason, and this is probably perhaps the best reason, is that you have some burning desire to explore a field of interest and discover new knowledge. And that's why we're here. That's why we are here as faculty. That's why we're excited that you're here as PhD students, because we want to help to kindle your burning desire and make it something that you can take on and go and know more and more about less and less, as we like to say in our field. Another reason people get advanced degrees is they want to increase their personal competitiveness. They want to be able to stand out in the job market and get a better job offer, or get a signing bonus, or get a startup package, or get stock options, or whatever it is that motivates you financially. And that's also a good reason, although you have to be aware that you'll probably be deferring your payoff for a few years as you get the degree. Yet another reason is you don't necessarily feel that you're prepared to face the real world. And I'm sure a lot of us got to the end of our undergrad degree or maybe a master's degree and we're like, I'm not really sure exactly what I want to do, but I'm not ready to take the plunge into the workplace yet. And so sticking around and doing more studies, reading more papers, writing more papers, taking more classes, that's a time-honored way of having to defer the hard choice about what you really want to focus on in your life. Yet another reason to get a PhD is you want to impress someone. You want to impress your parents. You want to impress your family or your friends or your significant other. And those are also, of course, good reasons. But chances are, if you're not here for the right reasons, then you might not make it when the going gets tough. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So my main point here is figure out why you're in grad school. There's a somewhat humorous cartoon here that's called School is Hell, but it beats working. And I won't read this whole thing to you. I'll give you a link at the end of the presentation so you can download this. It's really meant as a sense of humor. You have to read this with a sense of humor, but it talks about all the things that go wrong when you go to grad school and all the reasons why people go there for the wrong reasons. And so it's pretty funny if you look at it from a sense of humor point of view. So the first rule of success here is grad school is going to be a lot of work, so figure out why it's worth it to you. And you may also discover that over time, what you like to do and what you're good at and what people are willing to fund you to do may change. And that's okay. Be prepared for things going a little different, but always be willing and able to adapt to new opportunities as they come along. Now, we're going to be talking about research, and Akosh and others will talk about the various requirements in the program. I want to give you a bird's eye view of what happens during your research career. There are really three stages of research evolution, starting with being a novice. And a novice doesn't mean you don't know anything. Many of you know quite a bit based on your undergrad studies or master's programs you've been in. But you're a novice perhaps with respect to the research enterprise. Your goal by the time you're all done with this stuff is to become an expert, know something, know many things, in fact, about an area of study that perhaps nobody else knows as much as you by the time you finish that stage. And then once you get further along in your career, perhaps after you've been a faculty member or after you've been successful in a research lab or you've made lots of money in a startup company, then you become what's called an advocate, where you go and help achieve the broader vision of your community to get funding, to get respect, to get recognition for the great work in certain fields. So you're probably in the novice phase right now. Again, not to take anything away from people who've got experience, but in terms of doing all the work to get a PhD in computer science, you're probably at the beginning of that stage. And in order to get your PhD, you're going to have to become an expert. And an interesting question arises, how do you get there? Now, Akosh will talk more about the specific details of the program requirements, but at a very high level, you'll take some more courses. At some point, you'll do a prelim, which kind of tests that you learn something from your courses and you can synthesize information, perhaps not original work, but at least you can make good sense out of other people's work. Then, after you get past that phase, there's a qualifying exam where you basically present the topic that you'll be doing for your PhD dissertation. And then down the road, you'll do a final defense. And hopefully by the time you pass your final defense, you will really be an expert at something and you'll be prepared to really face the real world, unless you become a postdoc, but that's a whole other story. We'll talk more about this, but this can be the best time of your life. And the reason why it can be the best time of your life is because there are very few other times when you have so many opportunities to dive deep into things you have a burning passion about without necessarily being distracted by all the other trappings of life, like paying a mortgage or raising kids or buying a car and having to make car payments, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, everybody's different in terms of where they are in their life stage, but this is a really good time to focus on you and your personal profile, your personal experiences, deepening your knowledge and your expertise. And this is very, very valuable to do this, so use it productively. Another rule of success here, and we'll talk more about this, but this is an ever-going process, is understand the requirements in the PhD program here in computer science. So we'll give you a lot more tips about that down the road. Our program is organized into 4 main groups, and I'm not going to dwell on these. Akosh will talk more about them in his discussion, but essentially we have a systems group, we have an artificial intelligence group, we have a medical imaging group, and we have a computer foundations group. And you can see we have lots of faculty in each of the groups, with the predominant focus being on systems and intelligence systems, and then medical imaging coming up close behind that. You'll also notice that there's some faculty who span multiple groups. So take a look at this list, get to know these people as much as you can. Invariably, some of them will be your advisor or people on your committees at some point. So it pays to know who they are, even though we're a little bit restricted now in getting to know people as well as we might like, because we're largely going to be focusing on using Zoom or Skype to know each other. In my experience, there are 2 types of grad students. One is the bored grad student, and this usually happens once you get past the classwork and you're doing your research, and you may find yourself having a hard time getting up in the morning because you're not really interested in what you're working on. And the other type of grad student is the busy grad student. And their day is full of goal-directed, reading papers, writing papers, doing research, giving talks, going further, running experiments, writing programs, and so on and so forth. If at some point down the road, and this probably won't happen for the first couple of years, if you find yourself getting bored, if you feel that you've lost the burning desire, do something to make yourself busy. Switch research topics, switch advisors, take a leave of absence. And the point about being busy is not just to do busy work, but it's to be goal directed, it's to be proactive, it's to be productive. And we'll talk more about what it means to be productive in just a second. The single most important thing you can do to be productive as a grad student is to do good research, do excellent research, and then publish your research in top quality venues, be it conferences, be it journals, be it books and book chapters, and so on. In general, people who have lots of knowledge in their head but lack the power to express that knowledge in a way that's accessible to others, especially the reviewers for journals and conferences, are really no better off than if they had no knowledge at all, because people won't be able to appreciate what it is you know and why you're an expert. So don't hide your light under a bushel, as they say. Get to the point where you can communicate effectively what your great ideas are. The process of writing papers is an iterative process. The ultimate goal is to publish your papers in high-quality archival journals or highly selective conferences. Computer science is a little different from other fields in that we do a lot of work in conferences, but archival journals is also important too. And there's all kinds of bibliometric ways of being able to rank researchers in terms of their productivity. And there's things like citation counts and H indexes and I indexes or I-10th indexes and so on. The journey of writing papers is really an incremental process. You typically start out with maybe a tech report or a workshop publication, which has a fairly low barrier to entry to get it published. And then you can combine those things together, add additional work, publish them at highly selective or competitive conferences, and then finally often combine a number of conference papers together to make a journal publication, which in some sense is kind of the pinnacle, although highly selective conferences are also important too. It's very important when you do this, when you write papers, that the work that you publish is better each time you publish it. You don't want to get in a situation where you're self-plagiarizing yourself just to get papers written and publication counts increased, but you really want to add significant value. And this whole issue of plagiarism, especially self-plagiarism, has really become a problem for a lot of people in our field. So take a look at these links and learn more about some of the traps and pitfalls of plagiarism and self-plagiarism and avoid them in the work that you do. Steve Jobs, who wasn't an academic but certainly had a knack for doing creative and innovative things, has a nice quote here that's worth taking to heart. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you, and you can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use. Now, of course, in Steve's case, he often took things created by other people who worked for him and took the credit for it. But I think he deserves a lot of recognition for changing the world multiple times. And if we could all aspire to do as much as he did during his relatively short life, we'd be doing fantastic. So the fourth rule of success is start doing research just as soon as you can and start publishing your papers as soon as you can. And that, of course, will involve help from lots of other people. There's also a really nice quote from Patrick Winston, who is the late professor of artificial intelligence at MIT. And he has this great insight where he says, your careers will be determined largely by how well you speak, how well you write, and by the quality of your ideas, in that order. And there's a lot of truth to that. So learning to give good talks, learning to express yourself through writing, very, very valuable skills to hone. Do not miss opportunities in graduate school to give talks, to join student groups and give talks, publish, write, get feedback, really immerse yourself in this process because it will pay off tremendous dividends down the road as you go further along in your career in ways that are very hard to quantify up front. So I said before that being busy is important. So how do we keep busy and how do we get to the point where we're not bored? Well, the key thing you need to do is get funded and stay funded. It's very hard to do good research on an empty stomach. So therefore, you have to obtain and sustain your funding. As with most things in life these days, there's no guarantees. So just because you might have funding now because you're a TA, or you might have funding now because you're on a fellowship, or you get funding because you're an RA, you have to make sure that you do the work necessary to stay funded. There are three general ways to get funding as a graduate student. One way to do it is to pay for it yourself, or get your family or your lender to pay for you. That's pretty common to get a master's degree. For PhDs, primarily people are funded by the other two means, which is to be a teaching assistant, which is really a short-term, maybe a year-long way to be funded. But the really long-term way to be funded and to get research done is to be a research assistant. So your goal, of course, should be to aspire to become and remain a research assistant or an RA. So the fifth rule for success is take responsibility for getting funding and staying funded. Here's the quick comparison between RA-ships and TA-ships. Teaching assistants are provided by the department. Your role as a TA is to help the instructor of a class with office hours, with grading, and office hours these days are largely through virtual means like Zoom. And to be an effective TA, you have to provide value to your professor. You have to be able to be on time. You have to help the students. You need to be responsive. And the point of this is to do this maybe for a year. You don't want to be doing a TA-ship for too long. If for no other reason, it takes time away from doing your research, which is the reason you're in grad school. So research assistantships are provided by faculty based on the research grants that they receive or the contracts that they receive from external funding, typically. And in that role, your main responsibility is to help the faculty members do the work on the projects that they've gotten from their funders. So your faculty mentor, your PI, will tell you what to do. Hopefully, they will meet with you regularly. They will review your work. They will give you feedback. That's a good, healthy relationship between a graduate student and a faculty, is where everybody's learning and building on each other's abilities and insights. The ability to continue your support is really incumbent on doing a good job and making sure that the faculty who's supporting you can get additional grants, can write papers. Everybody has a virtuous cycle here to do well by working together effectively. So the sixth rule of success is identify a research advisor as soon as is feasible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the very first person that you work with needs to be the person you end up graduating with. Sometimes people find that they're just not a good fit for their initial advisor, and that's okay. You should be flexible and adaptive enough to roll with the changes as you evolve, you mature, and you get a better sense of what you like to do and what you're good at. So some other additional information, these are things you'll also hear more about, so I won't spend too much time on this. It's very important to get to know the folks in the computer science program specifically, and in the electrical engineering and computer science department more generally. So we have our department chairman, which is Xenophon Koutsakus. We have our associate chair, which is Robert Reed. You obviously have met Akos, who's the director of grad studies. We also have a director of undergrad studies, Julie Johnson, and you might run across her if you do TAing, because she's very instrumental with that. And then we also have our program coordinator, Chris Lindsay, who you've also got to know undoubtedly as part of the process of getting here. And all these people are here to help you. So get to know them. I know it's a little bit harder to get to know them than normal, but that just means you have to be more creative and more diligent at pushing to make sure that your questions, your needs get addressed. Don't sit by idly and let things happen to you. Be proactive and make things happen. So as we've said a number of times, this could very well be the best time of your life, so enjoy it. And I really mean that sincerely. When I look back on my graduate student days, it was so happy-go-lucky, a lot of work, a lot of fun. I made some lifelong friends. I learned things that have served me for decades, literally, in my later career. And so I hope you have as great of an experience being a graduate student here at Vanderbilt as I did when I was a graduate student years ago. So the last rule of success, which is really circling back to the beginning, find your passion, excel at it, be prepared to adapt and change as new opportunities arise. And if you take a look at the bottom, if you Google Douglas Schmidt, I think I'm the first one that'll come up. And if you go to my website and then type in graduate_students.pptx, you'll get a copy of all my slides that I presented here. So feel free to take a look at this stuff. Even though I'm not officially part of the EECS leadership at the moment, I'm always happy to help people out and welcome your emails and other ways to interact with you.